Some years ago I made these Spaulders. They were among the first pieces of armor that I'd ever made, and as you can tell they left a lot to be desired. Not only just in surface finish, but even as far deep as the articulating leathers and strap goes. They had been sitting on a hidden shelf for quite a while before I finally decided to take the step and turn them into something new and usable, particularly some new Spaulders based on some late 15th century ones. Obviously I had to add some of the pieces, but the majority of the pieces are the same. So let me show you how I did this. First of all, I had to take the things apart, of course, and while the rivets I originally put in didn't always do a great job of holding the leather on, they had to be removed all the same. For this I used a low grit belt on a belt sander to grind the rivets away into a very hot dust. Once all the pieces were separated, I could actually get to work on reworking them. So the first thing I did was to planish the upper piece of the Spaulders, since I left quite a few hammer marks on it originally. So I did this by using just a rounded face hammer from the inside onto the flat face of an anvil. I wasn't striving for perfection, but I think that they turned out pretty smooth anyways. Certainly more than before. So then I flattened the lames so that I could start fresh on them. And rather than curving them around something like with my hands or a mallet, I used a few hammers and an anvil to shape them in such a way that gives them more of a compound curve, which increases the strength and their deflective ability. First, I used a rather sharp cross-peened hammer, which give it a natural curve, but in order to make it rounder and smoother on the surface, I used a round-faced hammer, like I would use for planishing from the inside, and essentially planished from the inside. As you can see, this resulted in a very curved piece, but the important part is that it curves in two directions, which is what a compound curve is. This serves a couple functions, like helping the lames articulate better, but also it makes the whole thing just structurally stronger and gives the pieces more ability to deflect. So those are all good things for armor in general. After all of the pieces were shaped that way, I added the central crease down the middle. Again, this kind of increases the strength of the piece and I think makes it look pretty good. So I creased it by using a chisel with softened edges and a little tool which has a groove. So I just followed the pre-drawn lines that I had drawn and with the hammer and chisel and made a pretty aggressive ridge, which is kind of what you end up with after using this process. But this is too sharp for what I'm going for, so I take it back to the anvil and use a hammer that is square on some of the edges and push the sides of the ridge down so that they make something more like a crease, like this, as opposed to a sharper ridge. This is done for all of the pieces, the top part of the Spaulders, the lames, and the new parts that I had cut out and shaped additionally. And so then after I did that, I cut the pieces to the new shapes and made the holes. The back sides of the Spaulders are made with articulated sliding rivets, meaning that the holes need to be made kind of into longer rectangles or ovals so that the rivets can slide somewhere. And so I did this by drilling a row of holes and then filing them to that shape. Then I polished the pieces. First I did this by using the belt sander with increasingly high grits. I stopped at something like 220 grits since I wasn't really aiming for anything too fancy. And then I rubbed them with a Scotch-Brite pad soaked in olive oil to give it more of like a uniform look, as opposed to just the raw 220 grit finish. After all that, I was just left with riveting them together and adding the articulating leather pieces. While riveting the sliding rivets, I used a washer to make sure that they didn't fall through the holes or anything, and made sure not to pin them too tight, otherwise they wouldn't move properly. On the front side are just the simple leathers, since that allows for greater flexibility. And overall, I was very pleased with these Spaulders, because not only did it bring some new life to old pieces that hadn't seen the light of day in years, but it also worked pretty well, if I do say so myself, and I thought they looked pretty good. So there are things that could have been improved, of course. I could have made the surface finish better. There were a little bit of... I could have made some of the articulation better. But overall, they worked just fine. They're very serviceable. And for having made them in 2 days and not really intending them to be too high quality, I was pretty pleased with how they turned out. Anyways, I hope that helps you guys out. And yeah. Feel free to ask any questions that you have, and if you want to see more future projects, subscribe, notification bell, you know the drill, all that. Thanks for watching, everyone.